all for coming to today's discussion on the Great Resignation. I'm going to first start by talking a little bit about what is the Great Resignation. You've probably heard this term a lot, but maybe you aren't super familiar. It's also known as the Big Quit. It's an ongoing sort of economic trend in which employees have voluntarily resigned from their jobs sort of en masse, beginning around early 2021. And then it's really seen primarily in the United States. But all of these people are leaving. Where are they going? So it's not like, everybody has decided to live off grid. It's more of people are really looking at their situations and having a change of heart. So whether, there's been so many studies that have been done, a large chunk, there's a lot of people who are retiring early, it's just like, because of the situation, they no longer find that, working is the best thing for them. You've got another large percentage that are really just having a change of heart and switching industries. So, things that they've been doing for years don't really feel right anymore. And they really want to explore something new, a new passion. Other surveys that I was looking at, they said that 13% of people that they surveyed had quit because they realized there really wasn't a work-life balance anymore. And they were really seeking something that could provide that. 54% of workers in a study by ZipRecruiter said that they really wanted just to be able to work from home. And that was the reason that they had left a job. And the troubling thing is that only 10% of jobs out there really allow for that option. So, and then you've got, other situations that people might not think about. There's a lot of people who were the secondary income earners in their family who have decided to stay home because, with schools being closed and then you've got your, children doing virtual school, it's easier to, stay home and take care of them than being in the workforce. And then additionally, a third of workers that were in a survey by digital.com quit to launch their own business. So there's a lot of people who are becoming freelancers. And so that's a little bit more of like what we want to talk about today. So, I'm happy if anybody ever wants to jump in at any point, you can just raise your hand, unmute yourself, jump into the conversation. But really, as the conversation about freelancers change, it's like, what do we see freelancers as now? Like, is it just this filler job, or is it transitioning to something a little bit more serious where we're being taken a lot more serious and, this can be a full-time career? And then, how does this, change, networking? So let's start off opening the discussion by just asking, how are you networking now and growing your business in a time where companies are really desperate for good help? Has anybody seen anything regarding that, change?
You mean good help? You mean good help on the contract side?
Well, there's so many people who are leaving their positions, there's a need for employees. And so if you're not able to find that good talent, there's a lot of people who might be now reaching out to freelancers. And so I was just curious to see if anybody out there had seen a change in that, working with different companies now that you might not have worked with before.
Well, I'll tell you that, one of the reasons that, people thought I was insane to go out on my own in the middle of a pandemic, one of the reasons you build a plane as you're flying it, right, Julie? There's only so many I's and T's you can dot before you do it. So I was ready to go anyway. So, but to your point, Michelle, is that, I kind of wanted to at least have the fuselage and the wings on as the employers started to get their footing again, and we're looking to outsource more. So that's one of the reasons why I decided in June of 20 that even though it seemed like a bad time, it seemed like a good time to me. And I've only been doing this for 18 months, so I can't really compare it to what it was like pre-pandemic, because I've been doing it during the whole pandemic.
Yeah, and I think, the pandemic has brought out a lot, or at least this is how I feel. I think a lot of people who are just stuck in their situations where maybe they don't like their job and they're just like, this isn't worth it anymore. You know, I think that's also creating a change because I can speak from experience. I worked full time most of my career. I've almost made the 1 year mark as a freelancer on my own, which is really exciting. But I was really in a place where it was like, I just don't want to go to work anymore. It was not fun. It wasn't enjoyable. I felt like I was just being stuck in a windowless room for 8 hours a day. Like it was just not my ideal of like what work should be. You should enjoy yourself. You should be waking up and be excited about what you do. And I think that the pandemic has really caused a lot of like self-reflection of like, what is it that I want to do and who is it that I want to be? So does anybody else have?
Yeah, one of the things that I observed is that the pandemic significantly accelerated a number of business trends that were already in place, but were moving at glacial speed. That's the silver lining to the pandemic for all workers, freelance or otherwise.
Yeah, I was going to pop in and say, prior to the pandemic, I even had a slide in my presentations that would talk about the trend of the workforce. And, we used to say that, freelancers make up in America 30% of the workforce. And by the year 2020, it was going to be 40%. And by the year 2027, it was going to be more than 50%. So we were already on this steady incline of kind of taking over the workforce, And when I say freelancing, for those statistics, I mean, anybody really who is self-employed, full-time, part-time, whether you're a freelance designer or an Uber driver, whatever the case may be. And we were already on this steady incline. Like more and more people were embracing their entrepreneurial spirit. And to Jim's point, like they were saying 2027, we were going to hit 50% of the US workforce. I think we're going to hit there a lot sooner because of the pandemic. So.
Well, can I throw out some, Michelle, let me just throw out. So one of the things I was kind of struggling with, I mean, like when I was putting together the second blurb for the thing is like, okay, so what do people think? Is this a pro or a con for those of us who are already out here? Does that mean there's more competition or more camaraderie, so what do you think? Pro or con?
I think it's got to be both, right? I mean, there's always going to be pros and cons to every situation. So yes, if you've got a huge, portion of people who are launching their own business, it's not going to be, not everybody's going to be in your industry, right? So, but you're going to have a lot of new people who are looking to make it on their own. So yeah, there's going to be that competition, but then, you really do have to outweigh, it's like, what are the pros though? The pros of being able to sort of run your own ship, you set your own rules and what's better than that? I mean, it can be scary at times, of course. I mean, it's not just a walk in the park, but I think there's got to be pros and cons to every situation. Something else interesting that I had found was another term that I really wasn't super familiar with, but they call it now the great renegotiation. So not only are people leaving their jobs to follow their passions or other pursuits, but people are leaving their jobs just because of inflation and they're needing better pay to sort of combat all of the rising costs that we're facing every day. So another
I have two comments. One, I think it's a huge positive that more people are leaving the workforce. It's a positive for people who want to stay in the workforce, for one, because now they can basically negotiate for what they should be getting paid. The main reason I left a full-time job, the last full-time job I had, was because in 5 years, my job had quadrupled in size, and yet they only ever gave me a cost of living raise. And when I would ask them for more money, they would tell me that I needed to figure out a way to prove the monetary value of what I was bringing to the table. And if I could do that, then they could give me more money. But yet they didn't see my job multiplying as the reason for that. So the more people that leave the workforce, the better it is for the people who don't want to leave the workforce, because now they have a lot of negotiating power to go in and say, well, look, I'm just going to leave and go freelance. And then you can hire me and pay me 4 times what you're paying me now on an individual basis for a project. For freelancers, for us as freelancers, it's also a positive, because the more people that are in the self-employed sphere of the workforce, the greater power we have to negotiate for freelancers' rights. And so if we're just a small group, then you basically have a limited amount of power. But with a third of the workforce right now being self-employed or freelance, of those, the statistic that shocked me when I read it this week is 70% of those people have reported at least one instance of late payment, non-payment, or having to fight to get their money after they did the job. And so basically, the more people that leave the workforce and become freelance, the greater power we have in Congress to get the laws passed to make labor laws equal for everybody, whether you're freelance or whether you're not.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's a lot of us that just, have those experiences too. And not just to chime in again, but it's, as I remember the last company I was at, they promised a huge bonus, for as part of your, compensation package. And then, bonus time rolled around and it was like, we're not going to do it this year. And you're just like, what? So it's just so frustrating, because to me, it always felt like, a dad promising their kid that they were going to take him to Disneyland and being like, you know what, not this year. And so I really feel like that's why, as a freelancer, it's like, well, the only, person that I'm going to make promises to is myself. And so I do feel like, there's just so much frustration out there that drives us all to, go out on our own and really seek, what we feel like we deserve. And so has anybody else experiences, like, has anyone's personal values changed over the last 18 months after, whatever your experiences are, if you want to share?
I wanted to just say hi, and I'm kind of dueling in a corporate meeting right now, so I snuck off for 10 minutes so I could share. I'm Elizabeth. I've been doing freelance in Kansas City since for almost 22 years. Will be in September. And the one thing that, it's funny you talked about Disneyland. This is the only profession that you can have working for yourself where you can actually go work at Disneyland while you're there. And just the freedom, being a single parent and using the skills and working with the people that you choose to work with. You can set your own standards. And that's what I really, really appreciate, because I've never been one to follow a title or be caught up in the corporate America. That's one of the reasons that I left 20 years ago to, be on my own and do contract, and now just loving every minute of it. So, and, don't ever, for all the newbies, to make sure that you have your processes set up and protect yourself with contracts and agreements and deposits. And that way you have leverage, based on what you're doing. So.
Yeah, totally agree. I always feel like there's always going to be those a couple clients here or there that will really make you reinforce your processes, because it's like, once you've been burned once, then you're like, okay, never again. This is what I need to do to be stronger and more independent as a freelancer. So thank you for sharing.
I just follow what Julie does.
Our fearless leader.
Charging people for no-shows.
Yeah, I just posted that this morning. So I've become even more strict with my boundaries, and I don't know. I don't take shit anymore. I don't have time to waste. And I was sharing a story this morning. There was a guy out of Australia, of all places, who found me online somehow, sent me a note through my website, scheduled an appointment to meet with me for a copywriting consult. And then she no-showed. And I was like, well, that's weird. And so I, of course, I'm following up with her like, hey, are you having trouble connecting to Zoom? And she didn't respond. So got off the call. And maybe an hour or so later, she emails me, apologizing. I'm so sorry. She didn't tell me why, but whatever. Okay, I'm so sorry. Can we reschedule? Okay, things happen. Go ahead. Here's my calendar link. Gave it to her. She did it again. She totally no-showed on me again. I was like, honey, I don't have time for this. Like, I am so busy right now. And so funny enough, in between those two instances, I had gone to my scheduling app and I changed like the little disclaimer, the verbiage on there, and it specifically now says that no shows will be billed. And so I promptly fired off an invoice to her for wasting my time. And I was like, she's totally not going to pay me, but at least I can send a message. Like, what you did is just not cool. Y'all, I got paid. I got paid. I am so excited. I was like, that's right, bitch, don't mess with me. It was pretty awesome. Now I fully understand that I probably won't be getting her as a client, but I'm okay with that because I have enough on my plate as it is. And I feel like if she's going to disrespect me like that in the beginning, she's going to disrespect me later on down the road. So I was just like, Cortez, out. So yes, stronger boundaries in place. That's what I've done.
Yes.
Did she pay you in US? Did she pay in US dollars or Australian dollars?
US dollars. I made that distinction on my invoice. I was like, this is US dollars, and she paid through PayPal, so surely they got some conversion thing on there.
Hey, Michelle.
Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to go back to kind of your original question about are we networking differently because of what's happening in the marketplace? And I will say the one thing that I have found to really work, because people don't even stop to think about it, is because there is this need for good talent and everybody's fighting for that good talent. I have started talking about myself and pitching myself as a gap until that happens, because what I have found is I don't want a full-time job, but I can help support the work until you find the right person. And what I have found is oftentimes that will lead to then a longer-term relationship. Again, I've been doing this very shortly, but I have done that now with 3 different clients. And even when they hire, they still come back to me and they use me because they found value and I have a relationship established. So I don't know if other people have done that, but I've really started opening myself up to allowing myself to think differently about that. I've actually even submitted, I actually supported a company while someone was on maternity leave, right? So I had 3 months to go and improve myself. They're continuing to use me because they have overflow and I made such a good impression. So I just think, thinking of the ways that you can pitch yourself, because companies are lean right now and they really need the help. And before, when somebody went on leave, right, everybody else, it was all hands on deck, and they had to really use their internal employees to really support that time in which someone was away. And now you can pitch yourself as a solution for that need and build relationships at the same time. And I have found that to be really successful.
I've successfully done the same. So thanks for bringing that up. And I had the same thing. I was with someone on a formal agreement for months, and they hired 2 people to backfill to. And although it's changed a bit for me, they have come back to me. And there's a lot to be said for being able to, you can jump right in and, you don't have to be involved with a lot of the friction. I just, I'm there to execute, right?
Right. It's also a good way to feel them out as a future client, like a long-term, right? Because you get to know the people in the organization and you can realize really quickly when you're thrown into it, is this somebody that I want to continue to do business with or not? And so that's been another good thing of it, so for me anyway.
Yeah. And if you're participating in meetings with that group, you can actually get to know some of the other people beyond your immediate contact. There's always an opportunity to make an impression on someone else. I want to go back for a moment on a question Mike was asking as to whether it's good or other that so many of us are out there. And I think that one benefit is that with many of us out there and many of us seeking work, and with many people leaving traditional workforce, it's become more of an opportunity for those traditional employers to understand the rates that we charge. Because for a long time, I think that has been, a bit of a mystery to them, or an eye opener. If you were talking about someone 3 or 4 years ago about a project and they said, what's a rate? And if you gave an hourly rate, let's say, $100 or $125, whatever it is, that some of them were very appalled by that. But as they have needs, and as there are more of us out there circulating, buying for that type of work, it does become an opportunity to educate those potential clients about what's really involved. And there's lots of good in there for them too, of course, because they're not paying, your Social Security or your benefits, whatever. So I think that's a plus for so many people being out there and kind of spreading the gospel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I use the benefit leverage piece of that a lot in my talk. And I think that they very quickly understand all of the money that they don't have to pay me by contracting out versus having to do all the benefits and Social Security and whatnot. And that opens their eyes very quickly.
Byron, to your point about educating them, and the more of us that are out there doing this, how it's going to benefit the freelance workforce as a whole, I can see that too. Like when it comes to payment terms, like how often do we hear of freelancers trying to get work from, let's say, an ad agency who comes back and says, in their contract, it says, well, we're not going to pay you until 6 months after we get paid from our clients. You know, and it's like, why should we have to wait 7 months to get paid by a company, a big company that has the money sitting around? So I feel like the more of us that are out there, the more of us who understand what industry standard is, what business practices are for the freelance lifestyle, I think the better off we'll be, as long as we're all kind of barking up the same tree. Because, you know, back in the day when freelancers had this negative connotation and we were just hacks who were in between jobs, they got to be comfortable with mistreating us, right? And we've kind of been working on that over the years as the Freelance Exchange, as a whole, as a community, you know, like, let's improve the image of the term, and let's all have savvier business practices, and let's all band together with these same business practices, you know. And it's not just a Freelance Exchange thing, but it's a, bye Mike, it's not just a Freelance Exchange thing. It's nationwide, if not internationally wide. So yes, I think it's going to be a good thing for the workforce altogether, honestly.
Julie, speaking to I guess what you were saying with regards to like payment terms. Mm-hmm. For me, I don't care if you're a big business or a small business. If you're a small business and you can't pay me in net 30 at the longest, then you're not running your business very well, and you need to go back to school and learn how to run your business, because right. No business should run at zero on a month-to-month basis, or you're considered insolvent. Yeah. You just can't pay your bills. So, but one thing that I've noticed in the last year is sometimes when you work freelance, you get dragged into other people's legal shit. Excuse my language. So I was questioned in the last month and a half by 2 different lawyers, one representing each side, for this job that I was on last year. It was a rather large project management job. I've been paid in full. The photographer and the studio have not. But the studio and the photographer have not been paid in full because they can't show invoices to the client for exactly what it is that they're billing for. They're just giving her an invoice that isn't itemized. It doesn't say specifically what these listed items are. And they're like, well, we've already paid you a certain amount of money. We're not paying you anything else until you can tell us what we're paying for. So now the photographer is suing for copyright infringement, and I get dragged into it, and I'm asked a bunch of questions. And at one point in my conversation with one of the lawyers, I was asked if I was qualified to be the project manager on that job. Yeah, and my response was to list off a couple of things that I've done in the past. But my response probably should have been, why don't you ask my client, who you're suing, how they feel about the job that I did, because they seem pretty happy with it. But so, yeah, so there's some drawbacks to being freelance, but you know, all in all, you know, for in this case, it's them against, you know, each other, and I'm just providing information, which could be damning to one side or not.
A good segue to this question. Since we've got such a mix of people who are old pros at freelancing and a bunch of newbies, you know, what do you wish that, you know, people knew about freelancing now that there's so many people that are working from home and they're, you know, going on their own schedule? What would you, you know, think that you wish others knew? Anyone want to chime in?
One of the things that occurs to me is if you're a freelance resource and you know the skills you bring to the table, do not underprice yourself. And psychologically, as I think most of us know, when you actually set your price on a project a little higher than what the market will bear, that becomes an attractant to many prospects because it communicates higher value.
Yeah, I agree with that because I think there was a quote that I heard that I was at some sort of summit and they were saying like, you are not a discount, you are not a dollar store designer. So like, don't ever treat yourself like people. I wish people would realize it's like, if you've got a special talent, something that nobody else can just do easily. I mean, that is a valuable asset. Because I would talk to some of my younger designers that I work with and they would be like, yeah, I charge $25 an hour. And I'd be like, I feel like that's too low, you know, an extremely talented person who's just underselling themselves so that they could get a little bit of, you know, side work to help pay bills. It's like, you really got to value who you are and be confident in that.
To Jim's question, one of the things you mentioned, like, compare yourself to the market. Well, how do you know what the market is doing? I mean, other than just asking people what you do, a lot of people don't want to share that information. So how do you find out?
There are ways of researching that. Trade publications, talking in this group here amongst your peers. There are a ton of resources online where you can, you know, determine that. You're not always going to get every single penny down the way you'd like to ahead of time. But at the same time, there are resources to gauge yourself. Now, when you're new in freelancing, I understand. It's going to take a while for you to kind of get a feeling for the lay of the land, if you will. But it's something I think you grow into. And I'm sure others can add to this, but I want to throw in one other thing that the Gucci group is known for. They made the statement, quality is remembered long after the price is forgotten.
That's a good quote.
I'll say that I've been at this for 50 years. So, and 30 years on my own. And I started at $75 an hour in 92, and with certain clients, then over the time, like Lane Christensen, which I had for 20 years, I gradually raised it up to 135. Other clients, more recently, I've done it 125, but everybody now I've got it 150, and I'm not going below that. And I have the experience to back it up. So.
Thank you for sharing.
And I have found that other cities, like I had a friend in Minneapolis, and they're a lot higher than Kansas City has ever been. So, so you can't really go by national rates.
That's a great point. And I tell my students and my coaching clients this too all the time, like there's no one right answer for pricing. You know, there's a lot of variables out there. You can go online and you can find these salary calculators. You can find these worksheets that, you know, have you figure out your cost of living, your cost of doing business, how many hours a week do you want to be working, you know, and then they figure out an ideal hourly rate, which is all fine and good. But like, what if you live in Kansas City? What if you live in Minneapolis or New York or San Francisco? Like cost of living is going to be different wherever you go. The other thing too is all of these other variables like that come into play is how much experience do you have? How good are you at what you do? Are you winning all the awards? Is your phone ringing off the hook? Like you have to like really take all of this into consideration. And one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten when it comes to pricing is, you know, start somewhere and start putting out bids at that rate. If you're not getting any kickback whatsoever, then you need to raise your rates. If you're getting kickback all the time, then you're probably too high. But if you're getting kickback maybe once in a blue moon, then you're probably at the right price point.
Something else I'd like to mention, in my experience, I always tried to be flexible with my clients. Would you prefer that I just rack up billable hours and invoice you, or would you rather, because of the nature of this thing, let's just figure out a project price flat and go with that? And I try to be flexible with that as much as possible for client sat. However, in the big picture, if I could go with a project price and the circumstances were not looking to be threatening or prohibitive to do it that way, I would always push for a project price, because I know how quickly I can deliver the quality and the work. The client doesn't have to have all that back behind the scenes nitty gritty from me, but they appreciate the value I bring. So I would always tend to go with a project price. And then the big picture of the long run, if you did the math on that, you tended to be much, much higher per hour. But by quoting it as a project price, you weren't blowing away a client with, $600 an hour or something.
Well, right. And like the more senior level you get, obviously, if you are charging by the hour, your hourly rate is going to go up. And then I don't know about you, but sometimes I get calls and be like, well, why should I pay that exorbitant hourly rate when I can get somebody right out of school to do the same thing for this rate? And it's like, it's not the same thing. It totally, yeah, apples to oranges, difference in quality, difference in results. And quite honestly, to Jim's point, like I'm really quick at what I do because I've been doing it for so long. So why should I be punished for that? So anyway, great discussion.
To piggyback on what Julie was saying, though, when you're figuring out rates, because we're freelance and we work with people all over the country, not just in, say, Kansas City, if you live in Kansas City, or for me in New York, if you live in New York, it's beneficial to like figure out what the rates are in each of the areas that you want to be working. Because if you want clients from New York City and you're reaching out to and networking to clients in New York City, you want to be charging a New York City standard rate, not a Kansas City rate, which happens to be lower because the cost of living is lower. And if you do charge the lower rate, then you end up hurting everybody in New York because they're like, well, I hired so-and-so and they charged me this. Why should I pay you more money for the same thing? Just kind of what Julie is saying, but based on location, not necessarily experience.
I think another thing too is instead of just having people pay at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, something like that, I've always billed monthly toward whatever the project total was going to be, so that you have cash flow and they can see where it's going, and they don't just cut you off in the middle or delay, so that it drags it out getting your total. So you just bill how many hours you had that month each month toward whatever the total is.
And I'll say another thing that I've experimented with, which I found pretty interesting. So depending on what your services are and what you offer, you could come up with pricing tiers, like a basic package, something a little bit more, and then sort of like, your expert level. And so with those three different price points, you would define different deliverables that would go in each. So psychologically, most people are going to gravitate toward the middle tier because they don't just want the basic thing, but the extreme might be too much. So the way that you price it is that you price the middle tier for what you really want to get. You price it a little higher for the, the bigger tier, and then a little bit smaller for the basic tier. But I mean, if somebody, wants to pay for that third, high level tier, then that's a super big win for you. But then if more people are gravitating towards that middle tier, at least you're getting what you really wanted out of the project. And then, if they just want bare bones minimum, then they can take a lower price point. So something to experiment with if you're just starting out, or, haven't done that and you're not sure where, people are comfortable and what prices they're willing to pay. That's kind of a great experiment to figure that out. Let's see, I saw a question. Is there a good source for freelance rates by metro? Does anybody know of those rates by metro to figure that out?
I just put a link in the chat here. So Freelancing Females out of New York City they did like a survey of all of their members and broke it out by city. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I know that they've done that. They've attempted to anyway.
I had a discussion last week with the president of the Freelancers Union about the possibility of coming up with some sort of a calculator that they can add to the website. That would have drop-down menus, and you could go in and select like what the job is and what it entails and get a range. The problem with just like out and out like stating rates, which is why a lot of like websites and a lot of companies, or a lot of like freelancer organizations aren't willing to post rates on their website is organizations have in the past been sued for price fixing if you basically have a stated rate. And so in my discussion with the Freelancers Union, it was, let's do a range. And that range can be based on experience, or it can be based on a number of factors. But that way we're not giving someone an actual price. We're giving them a low, we're giving them a high, and they can figure out where they fit into that low and that high. But that's right now, that's just kind of a thought. We haven't figured out the logistics of how it would work or how we would get the numbers. So
let's see. Is there any other topics that people want to discuss about the Great Resignation? Looking back at my notes.
While we're talking about rates, I actually have a question. So because workplaces are basically kind of having to like really attract, employees more, I've noticed personally that there's a huge push for that transparency on like the W-2 employee side, where those rates are stated. Like there's a lot of places I know that are requiring that to even post jobs and things like that. So I'm wondering, do you feel like that kind of push for transparency on salary on the W-2 employee side is going to impact us on that freelancing side potentially?
I think the only way that it would impact freelancers is it would make it less taboo to talk about rates amongst your peers and figure out what is an acceptable rate. I don't think it's not gonna lower rates for freelancers, because we all know that working freelance, you traditionally charge what would be more per hour than if you're a full-time employee. So it's really apples to oranges in comparison there. But I think it can only help. Like New York State passed a law recently that says that people can no longer post a job opening that says competitive compensation. They actually have to say what the job pays. So it's a start. There's a lot of things, a lot of positives happening right now.
And we were talking about, do you give a project rate or do you give an hourly rate? And quite honestly, at the end of the day, why do they even need to know our hourly rates? What matters is the bottom line, what the final cost is going to be. So why do they have to nitpick and micromanage? Why do we have to be like fully transparent? Because a lot of times, like, let's say you're a designer or an illustrator and you design or illustrate a logo, right? You're not only accounting for your time and experience and skills and the results and whatnot, but the usage, the value of that logo, is enormous. They're going to be using that sucker for here on out, and it can literally make or break their business. Shouldn't you be able to charge more for that? So what a great way to hide that into your estimate is just to give a project rate as opposed to an hourly rate.
I agree. I think you should speak to, however you can speak to whatever the value of the work is to the client is the way to go. If you, and ask them what they think this work could, bring to them. Mm-hmm. If you're working with a wealth management company and you're on a project where maybe the goal or the anticipated new revenue to them, or accounts under management, as they call it, is 10 million, and they make 1% off that 10 million, that's $100,000 over the course of a year that they're going to get. So, speak in terms of, instead of saying, well, my time is worth $100 an hour, maybe it should be try to gauge some fraction of what the anticipated benefit to them is. Mm-hmm. And even, I've even tried to experiment with something where, if they object to a high rate, maybe you go in and say, well, I could reduce the rate this way, but let's work on a percentage of the success for the overall compensation. And maybe that gets you going at a place where you can be, but yet you reap the rewards as they do.
Right. Or you could like negotiate, okay, I'm not going to come down on my rate, but here's what I can do for you at the budget that you have, right? So you reduce the scope of the project.
On the photography side of things, just so people know, we usually charge a day rate plus expenses. In the e-commerce world, a lot of times people charge a per image rate, which is really your day rate plus expenses, and then divided by the number of images that you're going to be delivering, what their final ask is, so that they can see literally like how many products do I have to sell in order to make the money back that I spent on this one image. And so, sometimes it's broken down in that way, but for me, it's normally just a day rate plus expenses as opposed to a project rate. For project management, it's definitely a project management fee with payment intervals along the way, so that I'm not out cash and I can pay anybody that I need to bring in on a job though.
I think if anybody from the client side is going to sit there and demand that you tell them your hourly rate, it's probably not going to be a good fit to begin with. I recall a few years back, there was a gal who, I don't even know how she found me, but she called me up and, she was telling me about the project, and I'm like, okay, great. Let me go back and do an estimate. And she's like, no, give me your hourly rate. And I said, no, I don't do that anymore. I do project rate, and tried to explain why. And she just kept demanding. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I don't want to work with this person, if that's all she's worried about. And finally, I just spewed off some really exorbitant high number. And I was like, are you happy? And I totally hung up on her. Not happening.
Well, I have always given an hourly rate because I work for Barclay and Evergreen, now Barclay, and I work for Marketing Resources, which is changed names many times. It's now the Frank Agency. We always did an hourly rate. They bill the client at an hourly rate for all of the different people that were working on a project. That's standard. So I don't have a problem with it.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'm now an agency, basically. So
I was going to say, it does really differ from freelancing. And I try to do as much research as I possibly could on pricing. And then one of the interesting things that I found was like someone stating that you should never really just have a set price. You should really target your price more towards the client, because, a mom and pop shop is very different from a national brand. And so this reminds me of, if anybody remembers, I think it was 2010 when Gap redid their logo and they launched it at Christmas time, and it was awful. It was the worst thing, but they had shoveled millions of dollars into this logo that was just awful, that made their sales plummet. And, eventually they reverted back to the original logo, because there's so much exposure and higher risk really when it comes to like national brands and companies that are bigger, that demands at least a little bit of a different price, because you can't just say, hey, I charge, $5,000 for a logo. Well, that's not going to work for a mom and pop shop, if that's the clients that you're wanting to get. But, even huge national brands, that would probably sound like a steal for $5,000. But it's really, you've got to make sure that your prices are targeted toward your clients. Now, definitely, like Susan was saying, it's different if you're an agency, because that's kind of like the set standard that they lay down, before you. But as a freelancer, I think there's a little bit more flexibility, especially if you have different clients that you're working with.
I look at it like lawyers, lawyers charge an hourly rate, and they charge every 6 minutes too, 10 times an hour. So.
Right. Well, I think it probably depends too on what you do. Like with PR, like you had mentioned in a past luncheon, you're often working evenings and weekends, right? And you may not know how many hours you're going to accrue. Whereas if somebody comes to me and says, Julie, we need a trifold brochure, I ask a few questions. I'm like, oh, okay, in my head, 8 to 10 hours. What's the math? Boom, there's my project rate, right? Like I know what that's going to be. So I think there are a lot of variables for sure. I just thought of something and then it just escaped my head. Michelle, what were you saying? You were talking about difference in agencies.
Pricing for clients.
Oh, yes. One of the tricks that I have figured out over the years is, especially with my clients who come back to me over and over again, because I've been told, Julie, you're too fast, or Julie, you don't charge enough. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like I'm pretty competitive where I'm at. And so now I flip the script and I'm like, oh, well, what's in your budget? And I asked that question up front. I'm not shy about asking that anymore, because let's say I was only planning on charging, I don't know, $500 for this project, and they come back and they say they have $5,000 in the budget. Well, guess what? I'm going to be charging more.
That's my first question. Question number one.
Yep.
Then we'll figure out what work I'll do.
Exactly. And if they come back and say, well, we don't know, we don't even know what something like this would cost, you can say, okay, are you thinking 500, 5,000, 50,000? Like, keep adding zeros. They're going to have an idea of an amount that they're thinking about paying, for sure.
What I found too that helps a lot, I've been trying some different things over the past probably 4 or 5 years, but even during the pandemic, is I have some retainer clients now, where I have a set rate per month, and then I cap it out on how many hours that I'm spending on my end, and I say, hey, we've kind of maxed out for February. I'm going to need to invoice you a little bit more, or we need to, do March now. And as well, in the initial conversation, if they're a new client, most of my clients are referrals. And so that's a really good situation to be in, because someone, kind of knows, what's going on the freelance end, but, kind of setting, I know that the trend with designers and doing branding and identity is to do a day rate. Even with website design and stuff, people establish, hey, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to do an interview, get all the information. You give me all the content. And then within a couple of days, then I'll do all the work within a day. And this is how much it is. Right. And so kind of establishing kind of even what your day rate would be. Like if you were to work 8 hours, what would you charge, and kind of base it off of that. And, again, too, like everyone's saying, it depends on, who you're working with. If it's a big company, if it's an agency, if it's a startup. Again, at the initial meetings that you have, I've developed a really great couple different questionnaires that I kind of go through and talk about their market, talk about the goals. Like if they weren't to do anything right now, what would happen? Is it something that they need to get done? Is it a new product that they're launching? Knowing what their deliverables are. Before I kind of jump into the ring, it really helps to understand. And then knowing, am I going to be designing with a committee of people? Is this a nonprofit? You know what I mean? So knowing what the perimeters are, and two, they know that I have the availability, because I'm going to put them in my calendar as, I'm working strictly for you. When you're a retainer client, you get the level up on everybody else that kind of comes in and wants to work and have projects. So I hope that helps.
Looks like
I just got a retainer too on my new client for $2,000 a month, 13 hours. So, and I worked with Country Club Bank for 11 years on a retainer. Starting at 85 an hour, then 105 an hour, and then 125 an hour for 10 hours a month. And gradually, and if I had a major project they wanted me to work on, then I could bill that separately in addition.
I was going to say, it looks like we have about 10 minutes left before we close. So if there's any other topics, it could be related to the Great Resignation, or if there's any other questions that you just sort of have on your mind that you would like to ask the group, we've got a pretty good group here. So feel free to ask.
Quick observation, based on my contacts in corporate America and what I've been doing in my 4 decades in this realm, I think whether you're talking about a big corporation or a small business, I think the opportunities today, generally speaking, are bigger and better than they've ever been for people doing freelance work.
Definitely, I agree totally.
Any other questions out there?
Are you all noticing that your friends or colleagues are jumping ship as part of this Great Resignation, or is this just a myth that we're hearing about in the news? Jill, are you talking? You're on mute.
I haven't heard of.
I actually have had several people reach out to me that are interested in doing the same thing, and I've been kind of coaching them on the beginning steps of it. It's people that are still employed by my most recent company, and they see how successful it's been for me, and all of a sudden they get the bug and they're tired of corporate and they don't want to be pulling the hours that they're pulling, and I've been able to provide that balance in my life that I've wanted. And so I've had more than a handful of people reach out to me and just start exploring. So I 100% am seeing that among people within my kind of niche industry for marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few friends, not necessarily in the marketing industry, but artist friends. I have another one who's like life coach, energy healing, that have, and one's a teacher who have just, left their jobs and are finding ways to make money on their own, other ways.
Ellie, did you say you're not seeing it?
No, I haven't seen too many of my friends coming into freelance. They've changed companies, but they haven't changed to freelance.
Hilda, did you come off mute? You gonna talk to us?
Yeah, I did. My sister quit her job. She's a teacher and she's teaching at Pittsburgh State. My niece just quit her job too. She's also a teacher. So,
My sister's she started freelancing. She's a sign language interpreter. Forgot about her.
Teachers and nurses, man, they've had a rough go of it the last couple of years. So I have a feeling those industries are going to be impacted a lot.
People that do quit need to start putting money into a Roth IRA. So they'll have that savings. And also if they have an IRA or a SEP or anything, they need to roll it over and save it for future, not spend, like my mom said, don't spend everything that you make. When I left Hallmark, I had $23,000 in profit sharing, I think, and she made me roll it over. It's $400,000.
Wow.
So that's what you got to have, something for the future.
100%.
Social Security is not enough.
It's important for the people who are flipping the script and going freelance to establish yourself as a business by either registering as an LLC or establishing yourself as an S Corp, because without doing so, you probably are not going to be afforded the same protections under the law as people who are. Like you should not be running your business as a DBA because you have no protection from you and your business.
Getting sued.
Unless you have business insurance, I would think that would cover and give you protections.
Well, the protections that I'm talking about are specifically like if someone sues you, if you're a DBA, you haven't separated your business from you as a person. So even if you have insurance, they can go after all of your money because there's no separation between the two legally, right? You have to have a legal document that separates the two. And so when it comes to, getting paid and stuff like that and taking people to court, and anything else that's associated with it, it's better to be established as a business, as an LLC or an S Corp than just being a DBA and not having the separation.
It also saves you on taxes. S Corp saves you on taxes, thousands of dollars a year.
I was going to say the term's called piercing the corporate veil, where they can go after your money if you're not set up legally as an independent business. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, if you all know of anybody who fits the mold of what the Freelance Exchange is, if they do quit their jobs and they're looking to freelance, they're in the advertising marketing space, please tell them about us. Please let them know that we exist and we're here to offer support and continuing education, mentoring, promotional opportunities, networking, social events, you name it, we are here for them. So the more that you all can help us get the word out, the better off I think we'll be.
Regarding the question as to whether this is really happening or not amongst people I would just say that I was working with a company for most of last year, and I saw 6 people leave that company, and it would be a company that you wouldn't, if you read about it, it'd be like, why would you ever leave that company? But people have their reasons.
Right.
They either, maybe it's a person they were reporting to, maybe it was whatever the circumstances were. But yeah, I think it's definitely happening. People just reach their limit, and but I would also say on the flip side, and this kind of touches to Susan Pepperdine's point about having been at this for a while and having put away money and let it do its thing with the market. What concerns me for a lot of the folks who are really kind of jumping jobs, so to speak, is that if you're never staying someplace long enough to vest in the benefits that you're accruing, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot when you get to be a particular age. So that's, it's something to be said for that. And to her point, you need to be putting away. That's just, there's no replacement for time.
I think with the Great Resignation too, all of these companies who have employees who are leaving they still have to get the work done. So I think it's going to set up us freelancers, putting us, in a really good position where they need us. They really, really need us. And Yolanda, if you're listening, I think it's a prime opportunity for us as the Freelance Exchange to use our outreach efforts and get into these different businesses and agencies and let them know we exist and let them know how they can benefit from our organization through our, easy and free to use online resource, our portfolio showcase, what have you. But I think now's the time to start ramping up those efforts.
Yep. Jose, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yes, I'm really proud of being in part of this organization, this networking group, and I too do a lot of referring to the exchange, and sooner or later I'm going to get more and more people into it because I run into a lot of freelancers. But I do want to say congratulations, Julie, for 19 years, and I just wanted to tell you that I got you something.
What?
I got you a trophy.
What? Well, thank you.
I don't know how I'm going to get it to you, but I appreciate you.
Is that the graphic that we put out, the 19 years?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Jose.
Together, so congratulations for your 19 years. All right. Thank you for helping so many people, so many graphic designers, and the school and mentoring and all that you do. So thank you very much. I really appreciate what you do in the world.
Don't make me cry.
Nah, okay.
Thank you. Kelly, I blame you for the graphic.
Well deserved, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I honestly, it's not me, it's you. It's everybody who's been part of this organization throughout the past 19 years, whether you've served on the board, on a committee, or just been a member, we wouldn't still be here if it weren't without you. So thank you. Thank you all. I feel like I'm giving an acceptance speech and it's really awkward.
I would just
thank the little people, Julie.
I just did. Yes, who's talking, Byron?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you don't get a particular project with a company and they say something like, we think we just want to handle this internally, you can curse under your breath and that's fine. But, check back with them in a month and see how it's going, because a lot of times they think they want to do it internally because they don't want to pay you your freelance rate or whatever. But then that work, it gets lost in the shuffle of whoever was going to be doing it anyway. And you call back in a month and they'll say, maybe it went great, but likely they'll say, yeah, we haven't made the progress we thought we would make. So they're a month behind. And, I guess no never means never, or something like that. But if you don't get it today, check back in 2 or 4 weeks and say, how's it going? And, then you'll know, and they'll know.
Point.
All right. Well, it's 1 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I thought the discussion was great. So just a thank you to everyone for showing up. I hope you found the discussion valuable. We've got what's our next upcoming event? I think we've got a coffee meetup coming on the 10th of March. I gotta pull up a calendar real quick. Yes. So if you want to meet up. It is going to be virtual again, so links will hopefully be promoted soon, but we'll do until it, warms up a little bit more and we can find a location. So hope to see you all there as well.
Very good. Thank you so much for hosting, Michelle.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks all. Have a great day and weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Then.
Thank you.